Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pharmacovigilance, Ensuring the Safety of Drugs. My name is Danielle Cole. I am the CEO and founder of Black Women in Clinical Research. We have my lovely co-host today, Rashida Hall. Rashida, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being a part of this panel discussion tonight. My name is Rashida Hall, and I have been in the clinical research industry for 11 years now. And I recently transitioned from the CRA role to project management.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rashida. Andrika, we also have my other co-host, Andrika. Andrika, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Andrika Thomas. I have been in clinical research for almost 8 years, and I am currently a project manager at a cancer center.
Thank you so much, Andrika. So we have our lovely speakers, Kendra Powell, Betty Rogers, Jamie Wilkins. They all have experience in pharmacovigilance and just going a little bit back about what Black women in clinical research represents. So the mission of Black women in clinical research is to educate, empower, support, and help Black women thrive in the clinical research industry. And we just want to thank everyone for joining. Want to thank all of our speakers for joining tonight. I know that it's going to be a lot of information. So if you need to get that pen and paper ready so that you can, ask questions at the end, we're going to start with questions in the beginning, and towards the end, about 15 minutes of the last part of the presentation, you can ask questions. But I'm going to go ahead and have our speakers introduce themselves. Kendra, could you please introduce yourself?
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Kendra Powell, and I have been in clinical research for about 16 years. I actually stepped away from the field in 2017 to attend nursing school. So currently I'm not working in clinical research. I'm an OR nurse, but I am looking forward to going back into the field and merge my nursing degree along with clinical research.
Thank you. Betty, can I have you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Betty Rogers.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I've been in clinical research for about 15 years now. Previously, I worked at PPD for about 14 years in the pharmacovigilance department. I'm currently at a smaller CRO, EMS. Currently, I recently took on the position in December as the director of our safety monitoring group. So there I oversee a group of safety monitoring staff and the day-to-day interactions as far as reviewing adverse events, processing the cases that may come in from the different trials and projects that are assigned, heading up the different types of day-to-day tasks for them. So happy to be here and look forward to talking with everyone a little bit further.
Thank you, Betty. I got it right? That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. I definitely like to get people's names correct because I hate when my name is mispronounced. Jamie, can I get you to please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Jamie Wilkins. I'm a pharmacist by training, and I've been in the clinical research and regulatory space now for a little over a decade. Initially, I started out at the US FDA as the Deputy Director of the Division of Risk Management in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. I've now been at Pfizer for just over a year in our worldwide safety or global safety unit, which oversees pharmacovigilance for the entire portfolio of products for Pfizer. And what I do there is I'm a director and risk management product lead. And in that role, what I do is I oversee risk management strategy for our entire product portfolio. And I've taken on a secondary role over the last year as a safety strategy lead in our vaccine program. I'm helping to synergize our efforts in worldwide safety to make sure that we are well positioned to ensure the continued positive benefit risk ratio for our COVID vaccine. So I'm really glad to be here tonight and to introduce everyone to the world of drug safety. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. So we're just going to dive right in. I know a lot of times in the clinical research industry, there's so many different career options. And so we always like to explore the different career options and talk to people that's in the industry. So can someone tell me what exactly is pharmacovigilance? Kendra?
Okay, so pharmacovigilance is basically about the safety and efficacy of the various drugs that pharmaceutical companies are trying to get, to the public, but we have to make sure that these drugs are safe and they're effective. And so in doing so, there are clinical trials where they're collecting information to detect certain adverse events and how they affect the body, and how if a person has various chronic disease, how those things are going to affect the drug that this company is trying to put out there. So we're just pulling all that information together so that this drug is safe. The physicians will know exactly who they should prescribe it to, and as the public, they will also know exactly what they're getting, the side effects and all of those things. So basically safety, 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 efficacy. That's what pharmacovigilance.
Okay, yes, I feel like that's very important with clinical trials. Safety and efficacy always, those words are keywords that, are in the industry. So, Bete, what is your, what do you feel like is pharmacovigilance?
Pharmacovigilance can be broken down further as well, just to add on and piggyback off of Kendra, into two different sectors. Majority of my experience personally is in the clinical trial sector. So that's phase 1 through 3 trials. And then also it can be split up into a post-marketing sector. So that's pretty much when a drug has been marketed. So when a drug is marketed and sold to the public, the safety is not just not followed anymore. It's continually followed and monitored. So with a lot of the CROs, sometimes they're contracted work out by the pharma companies to go ahead and continue to review, assess some of the adverse effects and reactions that may happen due to some of the marketed drugs. So I think just because I'm not going to repeat anything that Kendra said, because she very well defined it, I just wanted to emphasize how it's broken down a little bit further in those two sectors.
Thank you. Jamie, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Absolutely. To continue what Kendra and Bate were saying is that pharmacovigilance is the science of safety. And it's critical not only during your clinical phase of your drug development, but for the entire life cycle. Just as Bate was saying, there are requirements that fall upon you as a manufacturer or as a CRO working on behalf of a manufacturer to monitor the ongoing benefit risk balance of your product. And whenever that gets out of balance, you have to interject as a safety organization to make sure that you're back where the benefits are actually outweighing the risks. And so what you have to do is understand that there are multiple components of pharmacovigilance, including adverse event intake in a trial setting, as well as in spontaneous reporting setting in the post-marketing phase. There has to be causality analysis completed with those cases. There has to be signal detection on an ongoing basis. There has to be risk management completed of any risks that you have, all the way from labeling to a REMS to additional risk minimization measures. And that responsibility falls on the manufacturer. There's also required aggregate reporting that's due to the regulators on an ongoing basis that gives them insight into your safety profile of your product. So it's really a holistic life cycle management of the safety of your product, all the way from your first in trials patients until you withdraw your product from the market.
Thank you. So with pharmacovigilance, I know that there are a lot of positions that fall under this umbrella. Jamie, can you share with us the positions?
Sure. So again, there are many ways for you as a person to fit in to the pharmacovigilance world. Again, during the clinical phase, there's a safety component. I think Kendra was really emphasizing that while she was introducing her thoughts on pharmacovigilance in terms of intake of those adverse events. They have to be coded in a structured language called MEDRA, for example. Those have to be coded, those have to be analyzed for causality, and then eventually those have to be put into format to submit to regulators. Moving into the post-marketing phase, you have to have people that are on the intake of your adverse event reports, from healthcare providers, from patients, from anyone who has a report. You also have reporting requirements from staff that are in manufacturing companies. So you, as a staff member of a big pharma company, for example, if you become aware of an adverse event, you have an obligation to report that as well. There has to be intake of that case. There has to be standardization of that case. There has to be a causality assessment of that case. There has to be packaging of that case to eventually report it to the regulators. Additionally, you have to have ongoing vigilance to make sure that no signals or no new safety issues are emerging from the data coming from these spontaneous reports or literature reports or whatever types of data sources that the regulators say could be considered a signal for you or a new risk emerging for you. You have to be well poised to respond to regulator inquiries at all times within your safety organization. And there's a massive risk management component as well, whether in the US with the REMS or with Europe and the rest of the world with risk management plans, which are a requirement of a submission for every MAA or marketing authorization application. And so there are differing parts all throughout the life cycle of pharmacovigilance where you can fit in. Let's not forget aggregate reporting, as I was bringing up. Those are required submissions to the regulators, and you need a massive medical writing staff and analysis staff in order to put those reports together as well. So there's very many places that you can actually participate in the pharmacovigilance process.
Thank you. So Kendra, what are the titles of these positions that fall under the pharmacovigilance umbrella?
Some of the titles that fall under are, of course, you have drug safety associate, drug safety coordinator. There are also medical information, because you have some people that are doing telephonic with the patients are actually calling into a call center and someone is collecting the information. So that's kind of your drug safety or medical information. At a previous company that I worked for, we also had healthcare professionals, specifically nurses, that were doing medical review. And so they just totally looked at the CRFs and the SAE forms coming in from the clinical sites, and they just did medical review. So those are just a few. I'm sure others have other positions to add, because all companies kind of have different names for them, and depending on the ladder that you go up in the company. So
thank you.
Lots of names.
Bette, did you have any additional positions that you would like to share that fall under the umbrella?
Yes. So as Kendra mentioned, it's definitely dependent on, the company and how they actually assign the leveling and the name of the titles and positions. In particular, I just wanted to also note, a lot of times there is an administrative role as well. So I know in particular working with larger CROs, because that's where a majority of my experience is, you will have different subcommittees who are broken out into a specific task for a part of the pharmacovigilance department. So in particular, when it comes to processing of serious adverse events, there may be staff that will do the intake portion, as either Jamie or Kendra mentioned. So intake is referring to when the PIs or the primary investigators or the site or the study coordinators report an adverse event to pharmacovigilance. Those would come into the department. We would have administrative staff to kind of enter those into a system with the preliminary details. What was the event term for the event? What's the subject number or patient ID? What was the causality assessment? As Jamie mentioned, that's definitely necessary to assess an adverse event. Those types of preliminary details. So you can have the administrative side and then also medical monitors. So for instance, if there's anyone who's interested with the MD background or OD background, typically they will be assigned a medical reviewer or medical monitor role, medical officer role, depending on the company. There's different titles for the position. So it just depends on what a person is interested in. There's definitely plenty of opportunities within pharmacovigilance.
Thank you. And I know we kind of touched on this, but did anyone want to add about some of the responsibilities for a person that has a pharmacovigilance position?
I think part of it depends on, like Bette was just saying, where you fit in the process. So some of the work product output in pharmacovigilance can help to, I think, tie back to what your responsibilities are. I think Pate was bringing up a good point, is there are required elements in a report, whether it comes from a PI, whether it comes from a patient or a caregiver or a healthcare provider in the post-marketing setting. And so if your responsibility is case intake, you have to be sure that that case is complete, or follow up to make sure it's complete, because that's your work product and your responsibility. If you are a coder, your responsibility is to take the words in that case and put it into standardized language, for example. If you are an aggregate report writer, an aggregate report which has required templates, for example, is your work output. If you work in risk management, a REMS or a risk management plan is your required work output. Depends on, you know, what your role is. For me, my work output is in terms of, are we able to successfully negotiate with regulators to what we'd like to do for our safety strategy? That's my work product many times, is have I been able to successfully push forth our safety thoughts and agenda for what we think is the best benefit risk for our products. And so it just will depend on what your role within the pharmacovigilance universe is as to what your responsibilities are. But ultimately, your responsibility is to always make sure that you are accurate, that you are getting all of the information, that you are not making assumptions of things that are not there, and that you are doing a clear causality assessment, if that is your role, based upon your clinical knowledge and what you have in front of you in the case.
Thank you, Jamie. Did anyone else want to add anything as far as responsibilities?
Yes, just to add a little bit on. I think as far as responsibilities, I think communication is a major key, as with a lot of our fields, of course. But within pharmacovigilance in particular, you may be talking to the PIs who are MDs, or you may be speaking with a study coordinator or nurse, or the sponsor at a pharma company. I think it's just key as you level up and gain increasing responsibilities of different positions, that you're able to clearly communicate what it is that you need to complete a full report. A lot of times you're following up on missing information in order to, if it's a regulatory report that needs to be filed to a health authority, you need to be precise and very concise in a narrative that you're writing up, so you can write up a full story of a clinical summary of an adverse event that happens. Because those are some of the major components when you're putting together different types of regulatory reports, as Jamie was just speaking about, just being able to just pull all the data together of what you have. Data entry is a big one too. If you're contracted to do that service, you might be entering data into a safety database. So computer literacy, able to, you know, be on email, which we all should be, I guess, very prevalent at this time with the pandemic. But those are some skills and part of the responsibilities in PV and a lot of the different cross positions.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rashida.
Yeah, thank you. So Bete, you mentioned medical monitor, and Jamie, you are a pharmacist by training. My question is, are there, I know that there are different avenues when it comes to entering into many different roles in clinical research, with pharmacovigilance being one of those. So how would you say is the best way, or maybe your way, that you were able to enter into pharmacovigilance, either with having experience or with having no experience at all?
I can start off with that. I think there's pathways if you are a clinician and if you're not a clinician, and that's going to be kind of a bifurcation for you. If you're not a clinician, that does not mean in any way, shape, or form that you can't participate in pharmacovigilance. I found that CROs are much more willing from a very, very initial level to train people to participate in pharmacovigilance, and you do not have to be a clinician. You do not have to be a clinician to do intake. You do not have to be a clinician to do any type of the coding for cases. You do not have to be a clinician to do aggregate reports. there are many parts of the process where being a clinician is not necessary. What Kendra was talking about in terms of the medical monitors, which on the post-marketing side have like tons of different names. We call them, for example, safety risk leads here at Pfizer. Those are the people that need to be clinicians, because you need to make a clinical causality assessment about whether or not the adverse event is actually attributed to your drug or product. And so again, remember all of those parts of the process that we were talking about just a few minutes ago. Much of that process does not require you to be a clinician. However, it's helpful if you want to get your foot in the door, if you are a clinician, to remember to emphasize that. And what I tell many clinicians that I talk to is that recruiters and CROs and pharma companies don't always understand what you do day to day as a clinician. So it's on you to tie the role in the company or the CRO to the activities you do day to day as a clinician. You as a nurse, you as a pharmacist, you as a PA, you as an MD or DO, do causality assessment almost on an ongoing basis. A patient has a cough, they call you up on the phone saying, I have this new cough. Outside of COVID times, what are you doing? Going through that med list in your mind of, well, is there something here where this is an adverse effect? That's a causality assessment in its most basic form. And so making sure to understand the roles and responsibilities of pharmacovigilance, you're able to articulate to recruiters and to hiring managers how your experience as a clinician directly ties into this role, even if you've never stepped foot into doing this work before. And I think that's important for everyone to understand from the clinician side. If you're not on the clinician side, like Batay was just saying, it's important to talk about your accuracy, your attention to detail, your ability to garner information from people and have clear communication skills and understand what's required in terms of SOPs, in terms of submission requirements, et cetera, so that you can show you have the skill set to move into the area.
And just to mention, so for me, I don't have a clinician background, and I should have probably told this in the intro, but I'm currently working on my Doctor of Health Science degree, and it is a it's with a concentration in the clinician field. But currently, I have a master's in pharmaceutical science, and then my bachelor's was in biochemistry. So a lot of times when you think of pharmacovigilance from the outside, you think, oh, you have to have that, patient-to-patient interaction or the clinician background prior. But like Jamie stated, it's not true. There's so many different sectors or different roles and responsibilities that it can be kind of, I guess, garnered or tailored to what you're looking for. A lot of the safety monitors that I have worked with, they may have a bachelor's in some type of bioscience arena. So whether it's biology, like I said, mine was biochemistry. Some of them may have, I think, respiratory therapist certifications. We have some LPNs, which is the clinical background, but it's not a fully a RN. So it's just so many different opportunities. And a lot of companies, they'll have different levels, as we spoke about before. So you may have within the safety specialist role 4 different levels. So level 1 would be entry level, where if you get with a company that has great opportunities to train and develop and grow, they'll train you up so that you can progress throughout the career or the ladder, progress through the ladder and gain more exposure and experience that way. So that's a great opportunity too. I actually started as a research assistant, which was more of an administrative role. And then throughout my career, I gained increasing responsibility and then moved into management later on. So it's just, it just depends on what you're looking for, but a clinician degree is not necessarily required per se.
And then, Jamie, what do you think are some of the different avenues that you've seen come within the pharmacovigilance role?
So I think if you are at an entry level, coming into pharmacovigilance, it's important for you to start to learn and understand, no matter what your role is right at that point in time, what all the different roles and functions and business units within a safety organization actually do. because you might want to do the role that you're in for 1 year, but you also might want to start exploring, like Bate was saying, different roles and ways to grow. And so for me, I always tell everyone you need to have a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and 10-year plan. And as you start to learn more about what pharmacovigilance is, because I think it's important to understand, if you haven't heard between myself, Kendra, and Bate, these roles and concepts are consistent no matter where you're working. There are laws and regulations around pharmacovigilance. So it doesn't matter where you learn how to do pharmacovigilance, those skills are applicable anywhere that does that type of function. And that's really important to know and understand. And so exploring and knowing what every single discrete function is within pharmacovigilance can help you explore to move up and that particular role, to synergize your role with that role, or to look to that role in a different practice area. For example, if you want to move out of a CRO, I know some people like to move from a big pharma company back into a CRO because you see more there. You're not just seeing your products or your portfolio. And so it's basically very important to understand everything that happens within the pharmacovigilance universe and not get siloed into your particular area too quickly.
I agree. And I love that you said you kind of have to have this plan. And I tell everyone, before you even entertain any position, please know at least 1 or 2 or 3 roles that you want to have and what that projected career path looks like. We love helping people, but if you don't know what you want to do or where you want to go, it makes it really tough for us to kind of help place you. So thank you for that. So Kendra, you are now a nurse. So how did you first transition into pharmacovigilance without the nursing background?
So initially, I was doing data management at PPD, kind of entry-level role. I was right out of college, went through an agency, and I had a friend that was a CRA, and I was actually looking for some different positions. And so she and I started talking. So initially my route was to go CRA, but my life kind of changed. I got married, and so I felt that traveling wasn't going to be a good thing for me to do. And so my friend had recently stopped traveling and got into a drug safety position and told me about it. And so I went to Par Excel, my first entry-level position. I was kind of doing some follow-up calling to physicians and just entering information into, I believe it was ClinTrial at that time, and just doing some reporting and reports. And from there, I was laid off from there after about 2 years. And then I went to Drug Safety Alliance, which was mainly a drug safety CRO. It was a woman-owned company, very small. And that's where I got my foot into the door, triaging cases, writing narratives, coding information. And I stayed there for about 3 years. And then I went to UCB, which is a pharmaceutical company. And I was at UCB for 9 years. And there I went in, continuing to triage. I started working on clinical cases, spontaneous cases. And my last job there, I was working just specifically reporting SUSARs to ethics committees and IRBs. And so I was there again, like I said, for about 9 years, and they went through a transition. And at that time, if you did not have a healthcare degree, because this is on the pharma side, so they love clinicians. Mm-hmm. So I was laid off, but I've always wanted to be a nurse. And so I got a nice package. And so it was just the right timing for me to go to nursing school. And a lot of people told me, you're doing it backwards, because most nurses leave the field and then come to PV. But I always knew I have that experience. I can go, I'm doing a second career, which is a great career. And I know that I can merge what I have with my PV and come back to the field, and I'll have more opportunities. So that's kind of how I got into it and my path so far.
I love your background. It's really colorful, right? And like, you've done a few different things. The fact that you've been able to kind of move around in different companies in different roles is really a testament to the clinical research industry. You do not have to be stuck in one role. If you feel like it is not something that you are getting out of it, if your brain is not moving like it should move, you have the ability to transition to another role or transition to another company to see what they have available for you. So thank you so much for saying that. I'm going to stick with you for this next question. So we talked about some of the different roles that you can transition into throughout the pharmacovigilance department. What are some of the key skills that you think you really need in order for you to be a success in this role?
Okay. As Batay mentioned earlier, you have to know how to communicate because you're going to be working in a team environment. You're working with your fellow colleagues in PD, but you may have to call a doctor's office. You may, as you're meeting, you may have to work with clinical project management. So you really have to know how to communicate and let people know what you need. I think you also have to be a good self-manager and be able to multitask, because especially, I think pharma side, but especially on the CRO side, you're working with a lot of different sponsors. So you have to know how to multitask, keep abreast on your timelines, making sure that whatever your role is, you're staying within those timelines. You're not mixing up different sponsors' information and sending out the wrong thing to the wrong person. So I think those are just really good skills to have, and being flexible, because things are ever changing. And so you have to be very flexible and just, know how to get the job done, be a team player, be a leader. Sometimes people don't know how to do that, or they feel like if they're not at a certain level that they can't lead, but you can always be a leader on your level. And that's how you can continue to move up the ladder, because others see that.
That's true.
So I think those are important skills to have.
Okay, Betty, what do you think are some of the key skills that will lend someone successful in a pharmacovigilance role?
I think one thing that Kendra mentioned that is definitely key to emphasize is in PV is definitely timeline driven. Everything, no matter what you are doing. So the necessity to be able to prioritize your schedule, to maintain timelines that are set with the client. Not only are you having timelines that are, well, we say client or sponsor, it's interchangeable, but not only are you trying to meet those timelines for the sponsor, but you might have a regulatory timeline as well to get a case to a health authority, whether it's the FDA here in the US, or it may be an ex-US country that you're working with on a clinical trial. And so those timelines, they get kind of intertwined depending on what participating countries a study is working with. So you might have, for instance, in the EU, you may have an XYZ timeline, and then in another country, they might have a local report that needs to be submitted to their health authority on a different timeline. So it's just keeping your dates together and being flexible, as Kendra also mentioned, to put something off that can be put off in order to pull something forward that might be due at a little bit earlier date. I think those are the main things, the flexibility, able to prioritize, great communication skills. And in PV, it's ever changing. Something that's always changing, whether it's your systems within your department, the guidelines, different types of regulations per country. So just being flexible and able to go with the flow and the day-to-day changes, or weekly, monthly, what have you, and able to roll with the punches. I think those are the main things.
I love that. And flexibility is key, not only within pharmacovigilance, but in the industry as a whole. We have protocol amendments, we have FDA guidelines that are changing, we have ICH GCP guidelines that tend to change with the times. And so flexibility is something that everyone needs to make sure that they're able to really have, and not be so stuck in one thing, because you will struggle and you will drown if you can't kind of go with the flow with the changes. So my next question is for Jamie. In addition to the different roles and clinician roles that you can have for pharmacovigilance, are there any particular certifications or classes or anything that you think would be an asset for someone either trying to enter on an entry-level basis or someone who's trying to kind of go up the ladder within drug safety?
So differently from other areas in clinical research, there is no one pharmacovigilance credential. There's no pharmacovigilance certificate for you to get, but there are certain skill sets that can help. For example, MEDRA coding. So MEDRA is a standardized language, again, that you can use to code a adverse event case, whether it is from a trial or whether it's from a post-marketing spontaneous adverse event report that then standardizes what happens in that case to be put into the database for further analysis. So if you have no other skill, there are classes to learn MEDRA, for example, if you think that you would like to do coding. There are other, certificate and pharmacovigilance programs. I know DIA has one, for example, but again, that can help you. But if you're not able to link the skill set that you have either through your bachelor's degree, master's degree, experience in another part of clinical trials or post-marketing, that's not going to help the recruiter know or understand, because there's not like a certification on the checklist that anybody would look at as qualifications for pharmacovigilance. So it definitely is not an area that is structured in the same way as others, saying, here's the credential that you need in order to be hired in pharmacovigilance. Now, I think Kendra's story is powerful, that as you think about your career trajectory in pharmacovigilance, moving up the ladder, most of the leadership in pharmacovigilance is going to have a terminal degree of some sort, whether you are a clinician, whether you have a PhD of some type. That's who you'll typically see in leadership. And some of that actually comes from some of the regulations. So for example, in Europe has a law that there has to be a qualified person for pharmacovigilance in every pharmacovigilance department. That person has to have certain credentials that include being a type of clinician, and they have to be available essentially 24/7 for the regulators to get in touch with should a severe safety issue arise. And there are not only QPPVs in Europe, there's QPPVs for many other smaller countries, for example. So if you're a clinician, some people farm that QPPV position out to a CRO. And so if you have a terminal degree of some type, for example, being a QPPV is a top level position, for example. So again, it goes back to that career trajectory. No, you don't have to have those terminal degrees to get in, but if in your 10-year plan, you want to be in leadership or have one of these top level positions in PV, you do need to think about what's the right terminal degree for you to have, unless you really want to stay in more of the operational side in terms of adverse event case intake, coding, et cetera. But most of the people, at least at Pfizer and the leadership there, have MBAs. And so you really have to think about what is the degree trajectory that I might need to work on either in the background or take a sabbatical or do like Kendra did and take some time off and pivot out to pivot back in order for career longevity.
Okay. So going back to Kendra, because you are, looking to transition back into the PV role, has there been anything that you have reviewed or something that has been able to help polish some of those skills to help you transition back?
So I'm just kind of starting to look into coming back into PD. But I mean, I think being a nurse and already working in the field, previously PD field before, I mean, there are just so many transferable skills. Being a nurse, you have to think critically, you have to be able to communicate, so all those skills are transferable. One thing that I have to look at, because when UCB was my longest position within PD, and they kind of had their own system. It was SPAs, and then they finally got ClinTrace. but I noticed that most companies now are using Argus, and there are some different systems that they're using. So for me, I don't have the experience. I do still have a lot of friends in the industry, and they've told me if you can use one, you can use all of them. So for me, that would be one thing that I would have to get a recruiter to know, or a hiring manager somehow, that I can come in and I can learn this system that I have not had experience with. So that's one of the things on the kind of lookout for me that I need to be paying attention to coming back into the field. But because I have, you know, still a general knowledge of things that are going on in the field, and even through this conversation tonight, it's sparking a lot of things that I've done before, but over the past couple of years, I haven't had to do. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that, yeah. So,
Hey,
but
you're getting interview ready.
Yeah, but for me, I think the biggest thing right now would be the system, because I haven't had experience with Argus or Viva. I see that you put there. So.
Thank you, Kendra. So I've heard a lot, like you all do a lot in your job. I've heard metric coding, medical monitoring, aggregate reporting. So can you tell me a typical day in your role, Jamie?
A typical day is going to consist of 3 buckets for me: operations, strategy, and reporting to senior leadership. Those for me would be my 3 buckets that I do on a daily basis. Weaving in those things that Kendra and Bate have said, being flexible, thinking on your feet, being able to pivot on a drop of a dime. And so in the mornings, we have a management system that we use for assigning medical writing, for assigning projects, for example. So I check into that, because overnight things from Asia might have come in for requests, for example. Again, I work in worldwide safety, so I have to handle every country in the world that Pfizer has a presence in. And so looking into what came in from there to see if I got any inquiries or anything from regulators through our regulatory department that I need to immediately handle. And then triage those kind of at first. The next thing I'll be doing is looking at the different projects that I'm working on in order to see if there are strategy discussions that I need to be preparing for or deliver that day. For example, today there's a product under development. I was working with another staff member on a strategy for us to present to senior leadership in a few weeks. So doing that for different products. And then briefing senior leadership about anything that might be a hot topic going on with the vaccine, which is something typically daily. Giving updates about that from my particular role in the process. Additionally, I am managing a fellowship program. Pfizer Rutgers University is starting a brand new fellowship with the FDA. And so I'm overseeing that program and its initial implementation. So checking in with the fellow, making sure that she's well situated in starting her projects. Lastly, I do a lot of external influencing. And so making sure for presentations such as this, I've also given presentations recently for the WHO. I co-chair a pharmacovigilance group for COVID manufacturers, for example. I participate in 3 others. There are various surveys that are always going around, conferences to co-chair or participate in. So making sure that I'm keeping up on that. And then assisting and supporting any of my colleagues in ways that they need in terms of, are there new projects coming along? We have a new adverse event reporting database, for example, that we started for our COVID vaccine with Pfizer. So today we had a 1-hour steering committee meeting for that. So again, it is these kind of 3 buckets: operations, updating senior leadership, and then strategy discussions. And then I guess that 4th bucket of external influencing that I do every day, and no 2 days are ever alike.
Wow, you must have great time management skills, because I can't even imagine doing all that in one day. How about you, Bate?
So I'll share from, of course, the perspective of my most recent role, because it's a little bit different. So I have two different parts to my role, one being oversight and then two being also I'm assigned to or allocated to different projects where I actually carry out the safety monitoring as well. So I greatly appreciate that because I'm immersed in the day-to-day as my team, and I can actually keep up with the tasks that they're performing, and I'm able to understand where they're coming from, if there's issues or inefficiencies, if they have concerns that they raise, I can understand that. So 25% of my time is assigned to, I guess, multiple projects. Maybe I would say at this point, I'm actually on maternity leave, but when I go back, I have 3 projects that I'm assigned. So I do take care of any type of incoming serious adverse events that may come in for those projects. So we assess those. We may have to write up a narrative for them. We actually have an integrated safety and clinical database, so it's not required that we enter into a separate safety database, the clinical information that comes through. So if there's follow-up with the site, I reach out to the site and obtain any missing information. When it comes to protocol amendments, I think Rashida brought this up. There might be protocol amendments that come through the Pharmacovigilance department. We have to review those for a safety perspective and provide any comments or feedback. If there's new studies that I'm assigned to that are starting up, we also review informed consent forms. We review, of course, the protocol. We have to draft up and write up a safety monitoring plan. So with the safety monitoring plan, and different companies call these different things, but in particular, this is just an agreement between if you're at a CRO and the sponsor and your responsibilities that you're obligated to meet, timelines, things of that nature. Those are documented within those plans. So I would draft that up, communicate back and forth with the sponsor. And then from the oversight side, I do have weekly one-to-ones with my staff. So just checking in with them, making sure everything's okay. I contribute to the hiring of staff for the department. So if there's interviews, I conduct those. Working with budgets and proposals. I'm a numbers person, so I love that piece. Any type of new pharmacovigilance services that come through, I provide input into those and estimate for the budget that may be required for that, depending on the services that a sponsor may be requesting. Reviewing of our SOPs, which are standard operating procedures or work aids that are specific for different types of tasks. If those need to be updated, I contribute to that as well.
Thank you, Bate, and congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So Kendra, during your time in the pharmacovigilance arena, I'll call it, what would you say was the biggest challenge for you?
Biggest challenge, I think, would be just the strict timelines. And as you said before, you have to be flexible. Things are ever changing, but you have to, that can get kind of stressful, the timelines, and ensuring that everything is reported to who it's supposed to be reported to on time within those reporting deadlines. And another thing would be that was kind of challenging. Of course, like I said, UCB, their systems weren't quite updated. So you were inputting things. You would input the AEs into one system. You would input the SUSARs into another system. So those things it could be a bit challenging. So you really had to be organized and really learn how to structure your day so that you could get everything done in a timely manner.
Thank you. How about you, Jamie? What would you say are the biggest challenges in this role?
If you are a person that doesn't do well in gray area, it's not a role for you. And I say that and it is not a personality. It doesn't mean that you have a bad personality or bad composition as yourself, but it is not as structured in terms of if this, then that, do this, do that, and the way that trial protocols are many times, because you are dealing with someone's interpretation of what happened to them, or someone else's interpretation of what happened to someone else, and trying to get information from that and having to use your brain to figure out, okay, what really happened here? What happened with them? What might have gone wrong? Sometimes you have lab data, sometimes you don't. And so it is not a straight line position or role all the time, because safety data isn't just numeric. And so there have been people I've seen that struggle because they thrive in a very protocolized situation. And so if you deviate from protocol, they fall apart. But sometimes you've got to think of a new way to search your database to find a signal that might not be what you did last time or the time before that, because that signal might be presenting in a slightly different way, which means you've got to think outside the box on how to search for it and go after it this time. And so it's for people that love to think outside the box, and for people that love sometimes living in gray area or very, very rapidly changing guidelines. For example, the REMS guidelines, I would say in my last few years at FDA, we wrote 3 guidances for REMS guidelines that changed the game on how people were doing things. I can't imagine how people had to pivot when we published those guidelines, those guidances, back to back to back in about a year. And so you've got to be ready for that. For me, that's exhilarating. It's also exhausting that all day long you have to wait for what's going to pop up at any moment. Someone from very high up in the company could call me and say, hey, I need you to send me this information and I need it ready in 20 minutes. Doesn't matter what I was doing right then. I've got to stop, pivot, and reprioritize. It's exhilarated in the moment, but at the end of the day, you do get tired. And so for me, that's the challenging part sometimes, is stamina. Is every day is an intense day. There is a deluge of adverse event reports from trials as well as from the post-marketing space. Just again, as we've been saying, just because something goes to the market doesn't mean that the reports stop. Sometimes people will call drug companies and say, you know, my elbow itched and I think it might have been because of the pill from your company. You have to report that the same as a death. Now, you might have different reporting timelines to regulators or how you handle it, but the preparation of that report, the information of that report, the coding of that report, all of the operations to get that report into your database are the same. And so it can be overwhelming sometimes, but you just have to find your footing and understand, like Bate was saying, what's the best way that you multitask, but also understanding yourself as a person to say, maybe something outside of ops isn't right for me because I like this rigorous, ongoing, systematic thing. Versus if you want to work in strategy, you better get ready to think outside the box every day. How are we going to approach this risk management plan? What's unique about this particular risk of why we're going to put it as an important identified risk versus not? Oh, look, Europe just added a new good pharmacovigilance practices chapter. What influence does that have on everything that we're doing? Do we need to stop and pivot and redo things? So every day, all the time is like that. For me, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's have a meeting. Let's talk through it. Let's brainstorm. But for other people, that's devastating because they're like, but I just did a project differently than that. Why is this one different? And so you have to know yourself and know what type of environment you thrive in. And if you don't sometimes like a little bit of chaos, pharmacovigilance might not be the best place for you.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I just realized that pharmacovigilance is probably not for me after after you explained that I don't do well in gray areas. I'm just being honest. I'm realizing that, you know, within in the clinical research industry, that is what I would say that I'll struggle with. So you got to know, know your strong points, know know where your weaknesses are. Yeah, me in gray area, not so good.
And for me, being in somewhere where it's like day to day, the same protocol, my brain will bleed out my ears. So again, it's just differences in people and knowing where you thrive.
Yeah, I think that's very important, and that goes, along with Black women in clinical research. Like, we want you to thrive, so we want you to find your niche and where you belong exactly. So we're going to go ahead, and I know we kind of a little bit short on time, but this was a great conversation. So we're going to have the audience ask any questions. I did receive one question. Someone asked me, what is REMS?
Okay, I'll talk about REMS because that was my life while I was the Deputy Director of Risk Management in CEDAR at FDA. I would say for the guidances for industry that have been written over the past 5 years, I've directly either co-written or participated in developing them. I also was one of the co-leads for developing the Manual of Policy and Procedure for single shared REMS development for use for CEDAR staff. But it is publicly available for you to read to see how that develops internally. REMS stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy. It is a law and authority given to the US FDA in 2007 via the FDA Amendments Act. What it is a set of authorities given should something be necessary beyond the professional labeling to ensure the benefits outweigh the risk of a product, that without them, the decision to approve would otherwise not happen. And so it's for a small subset of medications, the ones that might be thought of as most dangerous, that without these interventions placed within the medication use system, that drug would otherwise not be approved. Many times, the elements of REMS come from some portions of clinical trial design. So if you have required liver monitoring within your trial protocol to make sure that a patient is not experiencing hepatic failure prior to their next dose, that has to be undertaken during the review at the FDA as to whether or not those restrictions need to be in place during real-world use. And the way to ensure those restrictions is through the authorities granted to FDA and a REMS. There are 6 elements that can be placed in our REMS called ETASU, or elements to assure safe use, A, B, C, D, E, F. I won't go into detail there. There are also REMS that include communication plans like Dear Healthcare Provider letters. I'm sure everyone has seen those. And what I will say is there's quite a bit of opportunity in terms of REMS and REMS operations within CROs, because large manufacturers typically do not build REMS departments internally, but give those operational aspects out to the CROs. Some of the big ones involved in REMS include UBC, Syneos, PPD Evidera, RTI, IQVIA. Quite a few of the CROs out in the space actually do participate in REMS. And it's a very interesting area, but the FDA does undertake that review for every new molecular entity that comes in. They also are consultants to CBER, or the Center for Biologics. So it's a very interesting area. I'm happy to answer any other questions, offline. I don't want to take any more of the time here, but that is my specialty in my area, and I've written a lot of the policy for the US.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I can tell you are super passionate about this. I'm like, this her stuff right here. That's your heart. Okay. So last question right here. Someone just sent it. Where do you recommend a PharmD should start with job search in PV?
CRO.
I think they were saying like as far as what position, or
So for PharmD specifically, the mistake I see many people making as PharmDs is using the search term pharmacist for your job search. What that's going to do is narrow you out of a lot of these positions. I think Kendra and Bate were really making good points that these safety positions aren't standardized like a CRA, for example. A CRA is going to do what a CRA does at every company, more or less, versus the role for safety could have the term medical monitor, safety risk lead, drug safety associate, drug safety lead. It just depends. And so when you search for the term pharmacist, that might not even be in the description. It might say pharmacy, it might say terminal clinician degree, which is what you have, but you can't narrow yourself in there. So you really just have to search terms like drug safety. You can search REMS if you want a more US focused. You can search drug risk management. You can search pharmacovigilance. That opens this floodgates of positions in any searches. I find LinkedIn to be a massive treasure trove of drug safety positions everywhere, all the time. It just comes up and comes up and comes up all the time. There are tons of safety recruiters on LinkedIn. Every day they're in my box. I'm like, I am happy where I'm at. Thank you. But don't narrow your search too much by looking for the term pharmacist like you would for a clinician job, because it's not going to come up and show you in the search those positions that you would well qualify for.
Thank you, Jamie. Did anyone want to go ahead and put their LinkedIn information in the chat? Kendra, Bate, Jamie. I know that we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. And Kendra and Bate, did you have any last final thoughts that you wanted to leave everyone with? If there's any, quickly, if we have any advice that we would want to give to someone that's interested in this, industry?
I would say, first of all, just go for it. As Jamie just said, I think if you are a pharmacist, if you're a nurse, or you don't have a healthcare degree, just go LinkedIn, Indeed, any of these large job search engines, go in, type in drug safety, pharmacovigilance, read the job descriptions. And I think it's wonderful that Black women in research, they have the resume review and things of that sort. Utilize those things and other people that that are in the industry, so that you can get those transferable skills onto your resume and get that foot into the door. And network. A lot of the times it's about who you know, not necessarily what you know. And just do it.
Thank you, Kendra. Bate?
Yes, my button got stuck on mute. I was like, oh no. I just want to mention, if you definitely have a passion for PV in particular, and I guess it's with any field really, don't be afraid of the entry positions. It may not be exactly what you're looking for or the salary where you want to be, but if you get with the right company, a lot of times, like I mentioned before, they will train you up and give you those skills, which a lot of times are transferable to other companies, or you can eventually move into a different position where you can use those skills. As I mentioned before, for myself, I started as a research assistant, and I was actually in a contract position role right out of college. So I was just happy to get a job because I was a technician for a pharmacy technician for 7 years. So that's where I got a lot of my background experience. But I was just so happy. So I started as a contractor and I worked there for 6 months, and I was hired on full time. So you never know where, that might lead you to. So just be open to opportunities or, something better. You just can't be scared to, jump out there. So that's my best advice. Be open.
Thank you so much, Kendra, Jamie, Bate, for speaking with us tonight on pharmacovigilance. I learned a lot of different things, with this, with being in PV and being a good communicator and being flexible and very detailed and a team player and being able to pivot, like Jamie said, it's very important what I've learned tonight. So please feel free to reach out to any of us, reach out to Andrika and Rashida and any of us. We are here to help. Everyone is very welcoming. So feel free to, put yourself out there. We like to say, shoot your shot. Go ahead and jump into, if this is the position that you desire, feel free to reach out to people in this industry that hold the positions that you are looking to get into. Don't be afraid. You have to put yourself out there. Like we said before, it's like Kendra said, sometimes it's about who you know. So thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.